In some cases, these drugs too are efficacious and appropriate for certain segments of the population,
Yes.
like the cholesterol drugs, but not for the entire population when the statin works just fine. So this gets into care management issues and how we make these decisions, which some people might view as rationing.
It's
I
not
mean,
rationing, it's using
I agree,
appropriately.
but
And we
that's
shouldn't
the
conflate the terms.
right. But how do we make sure that that's not how it's viewed? I mean, how do we do medical management in a way that's appropriate and sell that to the populations we're covering and to the American public?
It's hard.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's a couple, as I think Peggy alluded to, there's a couple of different problems going on here. I mean, one of which, we can focus on the hepatitis C space, and that's gotten the most attention because $1,000 a pill, kind of shocked people. Now, on some level, this is a good problem to have. We have a cure for hepatitis C. This is great, great news. However, it has been pegged at a liver transplant, which only a very, very, very small fraction of the 3 million people, 1 million of which are on Medicaid, of people with hep C will ever need, and certainly will need now. So you can't just sort of say, well, we're going to provide this drug to everybody who needs it, reference priced off a small fraction. And similarly, I hear pharma talks a lot about the value of the cure. And I think there's something legitimate about that. But when I hear them talk about, because we know there are Alzheimer's drugs in development, when they start talking about the overall cost of what Alzheimer's does to this country in terms of nursing home institutionalizations and family caregiving, et cetera, and they start throwing around the trillions number, I get a little worried that that's what their reference pricing for Alzheimer's drugs is going to be. It's got to be more rational than that. The hepatitis C thing, I think, is on some level unique because it is legitimately a public health threat. It is a communicable disease, and if we can cure it, we should. The problem is that we're not set up to do that. And when we figured out vaccines or cures for smallpox or polio, did we sort of throw it out into the market and say, yeah, we'll figure out a way, people will figure out a way to pay for this? No, we had a national strategy, so we need that. On the generic side, today's story was shocking. There's lots more like that. It's happening all over the place in the generic space. But I think that in the grand scheme of things, on the Medicaid side, one of the things that frustrates us as payers is that we're constrained in the sense that Medicaid has to cover every single drug that is approved by the FDA. So we can't do kind of we'll just do 2 drugs in this class, or we don't think that one's cost effective, so we're not going to cover it. We've got to cover everything. We had to cover Viagra when that came out. So there are some common sense changes to the statute in Medicaid that could make a lot of sense for us.
This issue is really frustrating because, for so many reasons, but a major reason for me is that I don't see one easy solution. It is there are going to have to be a number of approaches, but I do know this much, that every purchaser I've ever talked to is absolutely furious about this. This is a huge issue for employers. When I look at Sovaldi, I look at the growth curves in the costs for employers, and it's front and center, right in the middle of it. It is driving their costs through the roof, and even more so, it's risky. They don't know what's going to happen next year. What's the next drug that's going to come along and just throw their whole benefits program out of whack. And I don't know how long employers are going to keep in that game. They can't afford a risky, continual jerking up of their costs. And so we do have to figure out something. Perhaps it's that Medicare, the cost of doing business with Medicare is you have to negotiate a reference price. Maybe that's part of it. We start to throw around some of the heft of the Medicare program to start to bring these costs into some reasonable realm, and to bring reassurance to the market of employers who have to pay these costs.
Yeah. So part of pharma's response to this would be, well, there's the R&D side of this, and we have to invest, and some drugs make it through the pipeline, some don't. There's something called the 21st Century Cures Act. And this is purported to do a number of things, and I think there's different views on its effectiveness. Any thoughts on that act?
Yeah,
Will it help in these?
Yeah, I mean, we're all for cures. We want to see more cures, but I think the challenge of what that piece of legislation would do is that, it assumes that there isn't enough incentive for R&D now, and there aren't enough, rewards out there. The pharmaceutical industry is, by far the most profitable sector in healthcare, probably if not the U.S. economy. Part of the challenge, though, is that the way 21st Century Cures would work is that some of the incentives would be to extend those market exclusivities, extend the patent life. From the Medicaid experience, we know that's what keeps prices high. When Sovaldi hit the market, and it was the only drug that cured Hep C, we couldn't negotiate lower prices because the manufacturer didn't need to. Why bother? When a second drug hit the market, when AbbVie got in, then we were able to bring prices down. Not nearly far enough, but we were able to bring them down. If we were to have given Gilead an extra 2, 3, 4 years of market exclusivity, we would still be paying out the nose for that. The other piece is that it would speed to market a lot of innovations, which sounds great, but what that means is curtailing some of the clinical trials and patient safety issues, which, again, in Medicaid has the oldest, the sickest, the frailest, the most medically complex, the most number of interrelated, social medical needs. This is not a population you want to speed up efficacy. You want to make sure that you're not using the Medicaid population as guinea pigs for this. So I think those are some of our concerns.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my concern about all this is that, this is not just something that, the government is doing. This is as a society, we're making decisions about how much market exclusivity to grant drug manufacturers. And I don't think you can do that and then walk away and say, and then whatever the price is, the price is.
Right.
I think market exclusivity is clearly the mechanism by which prices initially start quite high. And therefore, we as a society have an obligation to look at that, and we have a right to manage it in some fashion. Now, we haven't decided how to do that. There's lots of ideas. They have strengths and limitations and implications for R&D and so forth. That's all true. But what you can't do is just grant market exclusivity and say, and the price is whatever you guys want to charge. That's just not going to fly anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, there are certain clinical areas where we could stand to use some innovation, right? So antibiotics, for example, I think the development has been sort of underdeveloped. People would
Well, I
argue,
mean,
so-
that's partly a matter of overuse. So we're, we're kind of outrunning the science in terms of our overuse of antibiotics. So it's more complicated, but it is a problem.
Yeah, very, very much.
I think on some level we need, and this may come across as hopefully naive, but I think about sort of the technology industry and Moore's law, which sort of says the capacity of the electronics is going to double every 18 months, and we've seen that for decades, and that's why the power of my iPhone is greater than the computer that landed a man on the moon, and at far, far cheaper. And I know that's not going to work here in the pharmaceutical space, but I wonder, isn't there a way to think about that? Shouldn't innovations in the medical space, in the healthcare space, lead to reduced costs and not greater?
Not when you have fee-for-service medicine and all kinds of other
Well, your
distortions.
iPhone example is apt because I don't know how much it costs for the computational power of putting men on the moon, but I would bet what we're collectively paying for the iPhone today is far more. So it's highly effective, but it's broadly applicable and widely purchased, and therefore the total budget for IT and for cell phones is much, much bigger than it ever has been.